What if I told you one of the world's most powerful countries started with tiny villages, stone tools, and people who had no idea they were building the future Japan? Yeah, it sounds hard to believe. Long before samurai, ninjas, and mighty emperors, these islands were home to hunters, fishermen, and early farmers who fought to survive every single day. So how did those small communities turn into a nation that changed history? All right, let's go all the way back to where it all began. All right, so before Japan had famous cities, powerful rulers, or even the name Japan, these islands looked completely different. There were no castles standing on hills, no busy streets, and no huge armies marching across the land. All you could see were thick forests, high mountains, fast rivers, and long coastlines that seemed to go on forever. It was a wild place, where nature ruled everything. People who lived here had no idea they were part of a story that would one day inspire the whole world. And honestly, that is what makes this part of history so amazing. Look, the islands we now call Japan were already home to people thousands of years before writing even existed there. Nobody knows the exact day the first people arrived. That is because they left no books behind. They left only clues buried deep under the ground. Stone tools, broken pottery, old bones, and the remains of small homes slowly told their story. Every time archaeologists dug into the earth, another little piece of Japan's forgotten past came back to life. Pretty wild, right? Okay, so, scientists believe the first people reached these islands during the Ice Age. Back then, the world looked very different from today. Huge amounts of water were trapped inside giant sheets of ice. Because of that, sea levels were much lower than they are now. Some places that are underwater today were actually dry land. This made it easier for small groups of hunters to slowly move into the Japanese islands from nearby parts of Asia over many generations. They were not explorers looking for adventure. They were simply trying to survive. Sometimes survival creates history without anyone even noticing. Yeah, so, life was anything but easy. Every single day was a fight against nature. Winters could be freezing, food was never guaranteed, and dangerous animals lived in the forests. Imagine waking up every morning without knowing if you would find enough food before the sun went down. There were no grocery stores, no farms, and no safe shelters waiting for you. If your group failed to hunt, everyone went hungry. That is a kind of pressure most of us can barely imagine today. Survival was their full-time job. So here is the thing. These early people became incredibly good at reading nature. They learned where animals traveled, which plants were safe to eat, and where fish gathered during different seasons. They watched birds, rivers, and even the weather, because one small mistake could cost lives. They did not control nature. They worked with it. That simple lesson helped them stay alive for thousands of years. All right, so, over time these early groups became known for something that surprised historians. They started making pottery much earlier than many other places in the world. This was the beginning of what we now call the Jomon period. The name Jomon means cord marks because people pressed twisted ropes into wet clay before firing it in a fire. The designs looked simple, but they became one of the oldest pottery traditions ever discovered. Do not let those simple pots fool you. They changed everyday life in a huge way. Look, before pottery, cooking food was much harder. People mostly roasted meat over open fires or ate many foods raw. Once clay pots appeared, everything changed. They could boil fish, cook roots, make soups, and store food for later. That meant meals became more varied, and people could get more nutrition from the same amount of food. It may sound small today, but back then, it was almost like inventing a brand new kitchen. That is a big deal. Yeah, so, unlike many early societies that moved around all the time, many Jomon people stayed in one place for long periods. They built small villages with houses that were partly dug into the ground. These homes stayed cooler in summer and warmer during winter. Wooden poles held up roofs covered with grass or leaves. From the outside they looked simple, but inside they gave families safety from the weather. Sometimes the smartest ideas are also the simplest. Okay, so these villages were usually built close to rivers, forests, or the sea. That was not an accident. Rivers gave fresh water, forests provided animals and wood, while the ocean offered fish and shellfish almost all year long. Living near several food sources made survival much easier. The people understood something many forget today. Never depend on just one way to live. Look, the sea became one of their greatest friends. Japan is surrounded by water, and even thousands of years ago people learned how valuable that was. They caught fish using bone hooks, nets, and simple wooden tools. They also collected clams, oysters, and other shellfish from the shore. Today, giant piles of ancient shells still sit buried underground. Those shell piles may not look exciting, but they tell us exactly what people were eating thousands of years ago. History sometimes hides inside a pile of trash. So, forests gave them even more. Deer, wild boar, rabbits, birds, nuts, berries, mushrooms, and edible plants all helped keep families alive. Hunting needed patience more than strength. Hunters studied animal tracks and waited quietly for the perfect moment. One successful hunt could feed many people. One failed hunt meant trying again tomorrow. Every meal had to be earned. So here is the thing. The Jomon people were not just trying to stay alive. They also created beautiful things. Archaeologists have found clay figures called dogu. Many have large eyes, detailed faces, and unusual body shapes. Nobody knows exactly why they made them. Some believe they were used during special ceremonies. Others think they brought good luck or helped sick people recover. The truth is, nobody can say for sure. And honestly, that mystery makes them even more interesting. Alright, so, these people also respected the world around them in ways that still feel familiar today. Mountains, rivers, giant trees, and animals were not just part of nature. Many people believed they had special meaning. This deep respect for nature would stay connected to Japanese culture for thousands of years. Even though the world changed again and again, that connection never completely disappeared. Some traditions live longer than kingdoms. Look, life inside these villages depended on teamwork. Building homes, collecting food, raising children, and protecting everyone from danger all worked better when people helped each other. Nobody could survive completely alone. Every person had a role. Even children learned useful skills from a young age by watching older family members. Communities became stronger because everyone mattered. So, people also buried their dead with care. Archaeologists have found graves where bodies were placed in special positions, along with tools, ornaments, or pottery. That tells us these early people probably believed death was not simply the end. They cared enough to honor those who had passed away. That says a lot about who they were as people. Even in the hardest times, they never forgot kindness. Alright, so, by the time the year 300 AD came around, Japan was no longer just a land of small farming villages trying to survive. Rice farming had spread across many parts of the islands. Villages had become much larger, and some families now owned more land than others. That changed everything. Once people started growing extra food, they also started fighting over who controlled it. And honestly, that is how the next chapter of Japan's story really began. Look, Japan still was not one country. There was no king ruling every island. There was no capital city where everyone followed the same laws. Instead, hundreds of powerful clans lived across different regions. These clans were called uji. Think of them as large families with their own land, their own leaders, and their own loyal followers. Some were small, others controlled huge areas. Every clan wanted more power than the one next to it. Peace was never guaranteed. So, every clan had its own chief. That chief was more than just a leader. He settled arguments, protected the land, led people during fights, and performed important ceremonies. People trusted him because they believed their clan shared the same ancestors. Some even believed those ancestors had special connections to the spirits of nature. That belief made the chief's position even stronger. Power and religion often walked side by side. So, Among all these clans, one slowly became stronger than the rest. This was the Yamato clan. They lived in the rich plains of central Japan, an area with good farmland, rivers, and easy travel routes. Their location gave them a huge advantage. More farmland meant more rice. More rice meant more wealth. More wealth meant more followers and more soldiers. Sometimes geography decides history before people even realize it. So here is the thing. The Yamato leaders did not become powerful overnight. It took generations. They built friendships with nearby clans. They arranged marriages between powerful families. When talking did not work, they fought. Little by little, more chiefs accepted Yamato leadership. Some joined willingly because they saw the benefits. Others had no choice after losing battles. Either way, the Yamato name kept growing stronger. Look, one of the biggest clues we have about this time comes from giant burial mounds called kofun. These were not ordinary graves. Some stretched hundreds of feet across the land and were surrounded by moats. Building something that massive took thousands of workers. That tells us one simple fact. The people buried there were incredibly important. Only leaders with huge power could order projects like that. Those giant tombs still stand today, silently showing just how strong the Yamato rulers had become. So, the most famous kofun have a strange shape. From above, they look almost like giant keyholes. Nobody knows exactly why they were built that way. Some think the shape had a spiritual meaning. Others believe it simply became the style powerful rulers wanted. Whatever the reason, these tombs became a symbol of authority across much of Japan. Even after more than 1,500 years, they still leave people amazed. Alright, so, around these huge tombs, workers placed thousands of clay figures called haniwa. Some looked like soldiers, others looked like horses, dancers, musicians, houses, or everyday people. At first glance, they seem almost playful. But historians believe they had an important purpose. They may have protected the dead ruler or represented the world they left behind. Nobody knows for sure. That mystery is part of what makes ancient Japan so fascinating. Look, while the Yamato clan was becoming stronger, something else was happening outside Japan. Across the sea, China was building powerful dynasties with organized governments, written records, and advanced technology. The Korean peninsula also had several growing kingdoms. Compared to them, Japan was still developing, but the Yamato rulers were smart enough to notice something important. If they wanted to become stronger, they needed to learn from their neighbors. So, people began crossing the sea more often than before. Craftsmen, scholars, blacksmiths, and farmers traveled from Korea to Japan. They did not just bring goods, they brought ideas. New farming methods helped produce more rice. Better metalworking created stronger tools and sharper weapons. Fresh building techniques improved villages. Every new skill made Japan a little more powerful. Good ideas can travel farther than armies. So, one of the biggest changes came with iron. Stone tools had served people well for thousands of years, but iron changed the game completely. Iron axes cut trees faster. Iron knives stayed sharp longer. Iron farming tools made working the land much easier. And iron weapons gave soldiers a huge advantage in battle. That one material helped reshape daily life from top to bottom. It was a quiet revolution hiding inside simple tools. So here is the thing. Horses also started becoming much more important during this time. Before that, most travel happened on foot. Horses changed communication, transportation, and even warfare. A messenger riding a horse could carry news much faster than someone walking. Warriors could move quickly across long distances. Leaders could control larger areas because information traveled faster. Speed became a new kind of power. So, the Yamato rulers understood something many leaders miss. Winning one battle was not enough. They needed a system that lasted. Instead of destroying every clan they defeated, they often allowed local chiefs to stay in charge as long as they accepted Yamato authority. Those chiefs paid tribute, supported the ruler, and remained loyal. It was a smart balance between control and cooperation. Sometimes sharing power helps you keep it. Look, another thing made the Yamato rulers different. They claimed that their family line came from the sun goddess, Amaterasu. According to old traditions, the emperor's ancestors were connected directly to her. Whether people believed every detail or not, the story gave the rulers something priceless. It made their leadership feel sacred instead of ordinary. And that is a powerful idea. Yeah, so, imagine hearing that your ruler was chosen by heaven itself. Many people would think twice before challenging that kind of authority. Religion gave political power an extra layer of strength. The Yamato rulers understood that stories can unite people just as much as swords can. Okay, so, during these years, the title of ruler slowly became more important. At first, Yamato leaders were simply powerful chiefs. Over time, they started becoming something much bigger. They were laying the foundation for what would eventually become the Japanese imperial family, the oldest continuing royal family in the world. That is an incredible piece of history when you really think about it. Look, life for ordinary people still revolved around farming. Rice fields needed constant care. Water channels had to be maintained. Harvest time brought both excitement and worry. A good harvest meant full storage houses. A bad harvest could leave entire communities hungry. Nature still had the final say over everyone's future. Yeah, so villages became busier than ever before. Blacksmiths worked with glowing metal. Potters shaped stronger pottery. Weavers made clothing from plant fibers. Builders created larger wooden structures. Every person had a job that helped the community grow. Japan was slowly becoming more organized with each passing generation. So here is the thing. Even though the Yamato clan was becoming the strongest power, complete control did not happen overnight. Some regions stayed independent for years, others fought back. Building a nation took patience, diplomacy, and sometimes force. History almost never changes in a single moment. It changes one decision at a time. Alright, so, by the end of this period, Japan looked completely different from the land we saw in prehistoric times. Tiny villages had turned into organized communities. Powerful clans had formed. Trade with Korea and China had introduced new technology. Strong leaders were beginning to unite much of the country under one growing authority. The foundation of Japan had finally been built. But the biggest change was still waiting just beyond the horizon. A new religion, a new writing system, and a completely new way of running the government were about to arrive. Those ideas would transform Japan forever and push the Yamato rulers into an entirely new age.